Hey Candy, what's going on?
Hey, well, you know what? Our kids are now moving up and out and
Hmm.
they're cooking on their own, and we get phone calls about recipes.
Yeah.
And Boogie called me about how to make mac and cheese.
Hmm.
And he
Which
was
is my
asking,
wheelhouse.
yeah, he was asking for measurements. And as usual, I just said a pinch and got look at it. And then he was complaining. And I said, well, that's how mommy taught us. So that's part of the generational trauma of having to wing it. But it turned out fabulous. So
That's
I
great.
told him that's going to become his signature dish now.
Yeah, and I actually remember when Haley and Yaya both called me, Aunt
Right,
Judy, how do you make the mac and cheese? So I think
right.
that's kind of a rite of passage in our
It
house.
it sure is. So all three of mine know how to make it. So
Yeah. And
we
my
just
my kids just watch me do it
yeah.
all the
So
time.
all right. Well, you know what? We have a special guest on, Jill McClennan, and I have not met Jill in person. We met in a Facebook group for podcasters, and Jill is a death doula. Now, most of us don't know what a doula is, and if you do know about a doula, you know it in the context of birth. But Jill is a death doula, and she also has a podcast called Seeing Death Clearly. So,
Hmm.
Jill, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you. And can you tell us a little bit about what doula is?
Of course, and thank you so much for having me. It's a
Mhm,
pleasure to be here with you today.
mhm,
And yes, for anybody that's never heard of a doula at all, doula is just kind of a term for a person. Traditionally, mainly women filled this role, but not always.
mhm.
It was a person that would help you during transitions in life. Usually, most people that have heard of it, they know of a doula around birth. It's
Right,
completely non-medical, so we're not doctors, we're not nurses. We're just there to help support people mentally, emotionally, physically through these transitions in life. And so, birth doulas help mothers that are birthing or
mhm,
people that are birthing
right,
uh, bring the baby into this world and will usually support the parents before the baby
Hmm.
comes during the actual birth. So most birth doulas will be right in the room while people are having babies, and then we'll support the parents afterwards with
right.
help with, whether they just need to take a nap, they maybe need somebody to help with the baby for a little bit. And so as a death doula, I do it similar, but I do it on the other end of the spectrum. It's as
Mhm,
people are leaving this physical body. So
Hmm.
I will support people before death, during death, and after death with the grieving process. Because in our country, we really don't do this very well. We don't have
mhm.
enough support for people. We don't have enough conversations. Most of us are not prepared mentally or emotionally or even physically for the fact that we're all going to die. The people that we love will die. And that
Right,
is, it's part of being human. And so, as a death doula, I help people prepare. So it could be having conversations, talking about what do we want around the end of life. So I create a end of life plan similar again to birth, where most people that have had children, especially now, I feel like it's really a thing. Like parents really they create their birth plan and this is what we want and this is how we want it done. Now we're doing the same thing, but for people that are nearing the end of life. And honestly, all of us should have it, right? It doesn't matter if we're nearing the end of life. We don't know when that will
mhm.
be. So
That's
we
for
should all
sure.
have, right? We don't know. And so we should
Right.
have these plans in place. And so that's kind of the general idea of what a
Hmm.
death doula does.
Now, what made you gravitate toward this?
I lived with my grandmother at the end of her life. She raised me. I had a single mom who worked all the time. So it was basically
Right.
me and grandma, right? And
Yeah.
Hmm.
so I was very, very close to my grandmother. So when she turned 90 and we found out that she had cancer, my husband and I moved from California back home to New Jersey, well, back home for me. to
Mhm.
New Jersey, and we lived with my grandmother for the last 4 years of her life.
Mhm.
And especially the last couple weeks of her life, I didn't really know what to expect. I thought it was going to be like it is in movies. Grandma was
Mhm.
maybe going to sleep a lot and then pass away peacefully in her sleep. And
Mhm.
that wasn't the reality. And thankfully, hospice was so amazing because,
Mhm.
like the doctor that had been treating her, she was in the hospital for the last time and he sent her home and said to me, we're going to put her on hospice. There was no explanation. There was no, this is what you can expect. It was like, here you go, take grandma home.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so I was very unprepared. And I realized during that time, even how much I wanted to work with people in this type of setting, really supporting people that were dying, supporting their family members, helping them understand that a lot of these things are normal and natural for the end of life. We just don't
Mhm.
know it because we're so
Mhm.
sheltered from it. And it really helped to ease a lot of my fears and my anxieties when the hospice nurses took the time to explain to me what was happening.
Mhm.
And then I was able to be present with my grandmother and really just look at the experience as a gift for both of us, that I was able to be there with her during this really important time in her life. And it was a gift to me in that I was able to open myself up a little bit more to it and really just try to experience it completely rather
Mhm.
than being afraid and closing down. And so I
Mhm.
realized then that there was a need for people to do this work. I just didn't know what it was. And at
Right.
that point, I had a 6-month-old baby. My husband and
Mhm.
I were running a bakery together because that's my background is food service. And so time just went on. And when I heard about a death doula in 2019, it was like part of my being just lit up. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's it.
Right.
That's what I'm supposed to do. And so I started down this path late 2019, early 2020. And as we all know, 2020 was a very interesting year. Um,
Yeah.
To say the
and
least.
right? Oh my gosh. And so I was able to get done what I thought was going to take me a period of a couple years in a smaller amount of time because suddenly I was home and I had a lot
Right.
of time on my hands.
Mhm.
So, I've been doing this work since then, and it's not exactly how I pictured it. I thought I was just going to be sitting with people, bedside and helping them like prepare and plan.
Right.
But, I'm finding there's a need for death education, which is why I started my podcast, was because I
Right.
thought, you know what, people need to hear these conversations. We need to normalize hearing about death and dying and grief because we all experience it and
Yes.
we need to talk about it. So that's why I'm really happy that we're here having the
Mhm.
conversation. So your listeners can really hear that it is sad, no matter what. It's going to be sad when somebody we love dies, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be this traumatic experience if we can just prepare ourselves earlier for what the
Right.
realities actually are.
Right. Right. Judy and I were Jamaican, and
I was just about to start there,
thing,
Candy.
things in our world are not sugar coated. So,
Mhm.
and death is not a scary thing. It's a part of life. And I think of our ancestors, and they were serving as doulas without really knowing it. I think
Mhm.
Americans don't like to talk about death. Let's not say anything because they feel like if you say something, you call it into being or it's bad. I don't know what that is, but I imagine that you deal with, for somebody to come to you, they obviously have accepted that they're dying, but what type of resistance do you have when you meet people and just talking about death? Or do you have it?
There's an interesting level of resistance by generation. I'm really learning that when I'm out at events, because I will go out into my community, I'll have my little table at like community
Mhm.
days, to get out there and let people
Uh-huh.
know I exist. Children are super fascinated with what I do. They
Yes.
ask a lot
Mhm.
of really good questions. But that's also that age when are just starting to say to kids, like, we need to put this in the closet. We can't look at this. We don't want to see it. They're still curious about it. And I'm sure some of it is that they don't really have the understanding that they're going to die and that everybody
Right.
they love is going to die, right? So they haven't quite gotten there yet. People that are my age, like middle age, 40s, there's definitely a level of resistance, but the biggest resistance is with the older generations, where like
Mm,
I'll talk
Mm.
to people they'll be like they're 80 and they'll say, "Oh, I don't need to think about this yet. It's not time yet." And I'm like, "If it's not time,
Really?
mm,
yes." And they'll like
Wow.
interesting.
really, really just like almost run away from me. And the shock and the look of like horror on some of their faces. I'm like, wow, okay, I'm not here to kill you. I promise.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Right.
that's not the way this is gonna happen. But I think that really is just that, a lot of the older people in America come from a generation of we just don't talk about hard
Hmm.
things.
Really.
And
Yeah.
it's not, and that's why I do find when I talk to people that come from, especially like other countries that are just a little bit more accepting of death,
Hmm.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
find it really fascinating because I don't know exactly how to quote unquote fix what's happening in our country around death and dying. I know that there's a problem, and it's not just me, right? A lot of us in this space
Yes.
of like end of life care, we talk about this. Like this is a problem because people are not preparing properly. As all these baby boomers, right? We got this whole generation of folks that are aging and
Right.
they're not prepared. They haven't planned. They're not having the conversations with their children that they need to have. And so we're going to move into this phase where we're going to have a lot of people that are nearing the end of life and we don't have the proper amount of caregivers. We don't have places for people. Like that's a
Mm,
conversation I've been
Yeah.
having as well, right?
Yeah.
Like how many of us, because that's one of the things too, in a lot of other countries and a lot of other cultures, people still die at home, right?
mhm.
Like you have your mother, you have your grandparents, like you have the people in your home and you're caring for them and they die still in the home. There's still that family support. The whole family comes together. There's community support. We don't have that anymore. And so even for somebody like me, my children are still pretty young. I have a 9 and an 11-year-old. My mother is older, so she's in her like late 70s. And so if my mother were to need to come into my home for me to care for her, I don't know if I would be able to easily do it. Because how do we do this when people don't have support? We can't take time off work. It's not like you could say to your job, hey, I need to care for my mother. It might be a couple weeks, it might be a few months. I don't really know. We don't have the support system in our country to allow people to easily bring their loved ones into their home to care for them at the end of life. And it's, again, there's no easy solution that I've
Right.
found, but it's worth having these conversations because we're never going to find the solution if we don't have the conversations.
Right, right. So I have a couple thoughts that I want to share with you, and thank you for the explanation and talking about your motivation to do this work because it is important work. Going back to what Candy said about us being Jamaican, you alluded to it, people from other countries. When death occurred, we saw it. We went to the funerals with the open casket. We bury our loved ones in the yards of our homes. So there is like our father's ancestral home that we can go to and our mother's, and we can go into the yard and we see the grave markers.
We see our ancestors.
We see our ancestors, and
And I
it's
love
like,
that.
and
Yeah.
it's a whole conversation about family and roots and where we came from. But there, like Candy said, there is no sugarcoating. My other thought was people aren't having the conversations. Um, we're a little bit different because our mother in particular has been having this conversation with us since she was about 35 years old.
Exactly.
Um,
I was thinking 36.
so she plans ahead, believe me, and she has been telling us for many years when she dies, this is what she wants. And I think there are four of us, four children, and I think we're all on the same page. We know what our mother wants. She's now 84 years old. And because of that, there is a bit of relief. Like, we're not going to be panicking, worrying about what do we do next. We kind of know. And that's
Mhm.
not to take away the heartbreak that we're all going to feel, but at least there is a bit of a roadmap for us to follow.
Right. Right. So,
Yeah.
Jill, what type of person or seeks out your care? Is it somebody who is on hospice or
Family
who
members?
yeah, who seeks out your care?
Right now, not a lot of people. And
Mhm.
that's really, I think, partially because people don't know that death doulas really exist. There's not people necessarily going online and saying, hey, I need help around the end of life. Let me search for a support for that type of thing. Now, some people are. I mean, I actually have a client that, again, I'm in New Jersey. He's out in the Midwest because he got a terminal diagnosis. He was given 6 months or less to live. And he went online and he started looking for death doulas and he found me. Even though I'm in New Jersey, we meet over Zoom. But for the most part, people don't know to even look for us.
Mm.
So I
Mhm.
am finding that I'm getting referrals from people that personally know me. And it's one of those things where they'll say, my friend's grandfather just got diagnosed with a terminal illness and she's really struggling. Would you help her? And I'm like, 100%. Like, let me do this. My friend's dad is dying. My friend's mom just died. So, like, I'm getting these little bits of work from
Hmm.
all around the whole sphere. But ideally, if I was to ever say, like, my ideal client, like the person that I could help the most, would be anybody that wants to prepare for the end of life, whether they're healthy or not, right? They're a great person for me to talk to because, again, we all need to have this conversation, especially most of us. Like, your mother's probably fine with talking about death because it's never been something taboo to her.
Hmm.
It's never been
No.
something scary or unusual. Again, if you walk out into your backyard and you see your ancestors' graves, there's no pretending that you're not going to be there with them one day, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's just part of your reality. Where most of us, and I say us in like the American culture,
Right.
we don't have any of that. And so we have to really start from the beginning. It's never too early to start. But especially if somebody does get a terminal diagnosis, let's start talking now. Let's start talking about what you want because, as a physician, I'm sure you know some of this, that like there's this culture within the medical community of we're here to save lives at all cost. Like, we're going to do everything we can to save this life and extend this life. And so that's great, but then it also puts people in this position where they're not thinking to ask, well, is this treatment going to save my life or is it only going to extend my life? And
Mm.
if it only extends my life, what is that life going to look like? Maybe it gives me 6 more months, but I'm really sick. I'm in bed. I can't really do anything that I want to do. Some people might say, you know what, that's fine. Give me the extra 6 months. Other people might say, what happens if I don't do the treatment?
Hmm.
Maybe I'll die 6 months earlier, but maybe I could still take that vacation that I wanted to take. Maybe I could still go to my children's softball games or my grandchildren's softball games. Like, maybe I can really fully live that
Hmm.
shorter amount of time, but live it the way that I want to. But if we don't know to ask those questions, if we don't know to have that conversation, then a lot of people end up getting to the end of life and being like, but those last 6 months were really not good.
Brutal.
Brutal. And then
Right.
that's what
Right.
traumatizes all of us that watch it. Because
Yeah.
then we're like, oh, that was terrible. My grandmother or my mom or whoever it was, they were suffering. They were in a lot of pain. Like, it just was not good. Well, it doesn't have to be that way, though. We do have other options. We just don't know it. And so, really, like, you know, people starting to work with death doulas earlier in their journey, but really, if somebody were to call me and say, like, hey, I just got put on hospice, can you help? Yes, I still could help. But the earlier I can work with somebody, the more that I could get to know them and what's
Hmm.
important to them. and not
Mhm.
try to say to them, like, well, this is what I believe. I think you should do this. It's not about me and what I believe. I want to know what they want. And then once I know, then I can be the one to help communicate that with your family that maybe is uncomfortable and doesn't want to talk about it. Communicate that with your doctors because maybe you don't have the words, maybe you're not comfortable. Like, really could just kind of be that person to help my clients get the end of life that they really want, no matter when it is. But it's again, it's still a journey because most people are not looking for this type of support yet because they don't even know that it exists.
Right.
So do you find yourself being an advocate?
Yes, I would say an advocate is a good word for what I do for my clients, but also just for end of life care in general. Like I really want to advocate more for people just in general, having more options, having
Mhm.
more control over what their end of life looks like, not feeling so out of control. But when it comes to my clients in particular, like I will 100% advocate for what they don't and what they don't want. And that's one of the things that I've even said too is like the end of life brings out the best and the worst of the people around us as well.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
we certainly
Mhm.
know that. Mhm.
Mhm.
I know, and that is so sad and it's so
Yeah.
unfortunate. But also, if there's somebody that one of my clients absolutely does not want in the room, maybe you're like Aunt Becky's going to show up and all
Mhm.
of a sudden want to take control and you don't want that, I will make sure that Aunt Becky does not get in that room. Like, I
Right.
Right.
will be that person because your family's not going to easily stand up to Aunt Becky because they're in it, they're involved emotionally, blood wise, they're maybe related. Like, there's just too much that your family needs to worry about. But me, I'm not
Right.
part of that. And so if you really don't want somebody coming in and trying to get involved in something, I will be that person that will say, no, this is not what they want. And I know that this is not what they want because I also have this paperwork here that we did together. And it
Right.
Mhm.
specifically says
Mhm.
this is what they want and this is what they don't want. So I'm just carrying out their wishes. And it's again, that's why it's important too that I talk to people earlier than later so that I can really know what they want, not wait until they're so sick that they can't easily communicate because they just
Right.
can't communicate.
Yeah.
Right. So,
I
Jill, I have a question. Hold
Mhm.
on.
It's
So
okay.
I'm thinking of the before, you're working with your client, and through the process of their passing. You also mentioned working with the family afterward. So what does that look like? Because now that person is gone. So what are you now doing with the family? What does that look like for you, for them?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different ways that I have worked with people and that I can work with people around, grieving. One thing is when we're anticipating somebody's death, there's already going to be some grief that comes up. But we're still so like, there's so much going on and there's so much movement, and we're still so invested in being there and doing everything. And then once they die, it's like, oh, now I have nothing else to put my energy into. And so that's where I'll sometimes say I'm almost like a life coach, but I'm working with people around the end of life and grief because that's when I will sit with people. I will allow them to verbally, right, express to me what is going on. Then I also will create plans with people. Like I worked with a young person a couple years ago that their parent had died by suicide while they were home on Thanksgiving break. And they had
Wow.
to go back to college and essentially meet up with all their friends that are going to say, how was your Thanksgiving break?
Yes.
How do we deal with that? How do we work through
Mhm.
that? And so with them, I created a resource plan and we talked about what do they like to do? Are they somebody that likes to move a lot? Are they somebody that likes to journal? Are they like what is it that resonates the most with them? And we talked about what they could do when that grief was triggered, but they weren't in a place where they were going to be able to
Mm.
express it. But
Mhm.
we also don't want to hold it in because that's not healthy either. And so some of the things that we even talked about was, maybe you're in class and somebody says something and your grief gets triggered. Go to the bathroom and like open and close your hands, make some fists, like shake your hands around, shake your arms, just like let some of it out in a way that you can then go back to class, you could then focus. But now what happens when you go home? Maybe you put on some music, you dance, you cry, you journal. Like, what is it that people need to do to express it? And so, I really worked with them to just come up with a plan that works for them, not for me,
Mhm.
but like,
Mhm.
let's figure out what can help you, because we don't know how to navigate grief well, because again, we have no good examples. What have we all learned to do? Just shove it down for the most part. Because again, you go to a funeral, most of the time it's very somber, it's very quiet. People aren't crying, they're not wailing, they're not doing the things that our ancestors used to do to allow that grief to come out. And so we all just hold it in. And so when I work with clients, it is almost like that life coaching of, it's not just listening to them like a therapist would be. It's like, let me help you find tools that will allow you to work through your grief. Because I really do believe that we need to move our bodies, whatever that means to somebody. You need to move your body to allow that grief to come out. And even people that maybe didn't have somebody that died right now, there's a lot of people that walk around holding grief for a really long time. And
Mhm.
until they can express it, it will stay in them and it'll be easily triggered. And then they'll wonder why it's 5 years later and they're still not able to feel okay with the death. Again, you're never going to
Mhm.
fully get over the death of somebody that you
Right.
love, but you can get to a place where you can feel okay with it, knowing that it's a natural part of being a human, that we all have to die. And so I will work with people at any stage, but especially right after a death. Like, let's just kind of, work together. Because even, say I had spoken with a woman whose husband had died. They were young. She had a young child. And she said, after he died, everybody leaves. They're still
Mhm.
all, even after they take all the medical equipment, the house is a disaster because stuff is just basically shoved everywhere in order to fit in the hospital bed and all the medical equipment. She's like, and then everybody leaves, and then you're by yourself and you're like in this house, and it's overwhelming. Even just the idea of trying to move furniture back. Like, okay, call
Yes.
me. Like, call me. I will be there. I will come. I will
Mhm.
sit with you if you want to go through things, but you don't feel like you're emotionally ready to. But you just need to at least like clean out the trash and just move things around. Like, I will do that for people. And so that's why it's really different, because sometimes people say, oh, are you like a therapist? Are you a counselor? Kind of, in some ways, I fill some of that role, but really to me, doulas are more about just bringing all of these parts together. Again, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. Like, a lot of people go through spiritual crises when somebody they love dies, because then it's like, I don't know where they went. Like, my faith told me this. This is what I always thought when I was a child. Now I'm not sure. And again, God forbid if it's like somebody takes their own life, then there's, depending on what religion you grew up with, there's
Yes,
a lot of that
exactly.
fear of like, where did they go?
Right.
And so I can just kind of support people through whatever's coming up for them during the grieving process, just to help them feel more grounded and feel more present and better able to just kind of move into, quote unquote, normal life again, because our society really doesn't give us a break. If a child dies, you get this much. If a spouse dies, you get this much. If a parent
Mhm.
dies, you get maybe a little bit, but like,
Mhm.
there's this idea of like, well, you should come back to work and just start going back and doing everything like you used to do, with no real period of, I need to process this. My body just needs to process. My mind, my heart, everything needs to process the experience I just went through.
Mhm.
That's so right because you know, like the closer in relation to you, people give you more grace. But if you said, "Oh, this is a cousin or somebody who you didn't grow up with," people don't understand why you're in grief, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
It's the timing of this, Jill, I think is so so good for me personally. I feel like there's been a lot of death around me. Um, I think it's been 4 people that I've known in the last handful of months, and it's been, definitely challenging to go from one to another to another to another. And I was thinking about what you said about in the past, our ancestors would be wailing, would be crying during a service, and would be able to let it out. And most recently, I thought, this is a beautiful service, but that emotion that's in me has nowhere to go right now. And
Yeah,
I can't fall out on the floor here.
yeah,
But it's like I'm actually looking forward to a time where I'm with my loved ones, where we have this shared grief, and I can do that because, it's like you need to behave yourself during a service. You need, we've always been told you need to be,
don't make a scene.
don't make a
Mhm.
scene, don't go crazy. And if you do go crazy, then everybody's talking about Aunt Becky and how she fell out at the service and how
Yeah,
inappropriate it was.
yeah,
So, finding that space where it's a comfortable and trusting environment to do that and to let go, I think is really a huge component of the grief process for all of us.
yeah. So, Jill, what types of things do you do when you come into the home and somebody has asked for your services? Um, is it how do you make the person comfortable and how do you help but without being an intrusion in the fabric of that family?
There is different ways that I can definitely help people. And again, it depends on what phase they're in. Some of it is just again coming into the home and having the conversation of what do you want? And like when I do these plans with people, I have a document that I created. It takes me 2 to 3 hours for this conversation because I also don't want to rush it and just be like, all right, well, we have these really difficult, important things we need to talk about. So like I try to like talk about some of the more difficult things and then go to like, well, what did you like doing when you were a kid? What kind of sports did you play? Like kind of
Yeah,
weave in some of
yeah,
those things.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I create that plan, and part of that plan is, where do you want to die? Do you want to be in your home? If you do want to be in your home, where do you want to be? Where do you want to have a hospital bed? What could we move around? And again, I could physically help people rearrange their space. Let's bring in the photographs that you really want. Maybe if it's in your dining room or your living room, because that's the only space for the hospital bed,
Hmm.
but let's transform this room into what you want. Let's bring your favorite blankets, your favorite pillows. Just because it's a hospital bed doesn't mean it needs to look like a hospital bed, right? We can
Hmm.
transform the entire space to be, I like to think of it as like a ritual space, right? This is going to be your space and your family space. And so let's set it up. What kind of music do you want? Maybe you don't want music, do you want a television show? But I feel like a lot of people really want to kind of get away from that. And even
right,
when I go in to see somebody in a hospital, like the TV's blaring, there's the
right.
commercials, there's all this stuff. And I'm like, can we not
Hmm.
have that? Like, let's put on ocean noises or just at least something that's a little calmer. Let's change
Hmm.
the lighting. So, like, there's some of that. But then, like you said, like, I don't want to be the person that's like in the way, that's trying to take charge, that's trying to be in control. So, some of it is also like allowing the family to kind of come in and do what they need to do. I will, if somebody is like actively dying, meaning they're at that last phase, they may be unconscious, their breathing is probably changing. Like there's definitely some changes that the body goes through. It can be a little bit uncomfortable if you're not used to seeing it, if you've never
Hmm.
experienced it. And so part of what I'll do then is just like gently encourage the family. Like, it's okay if you want to go up and hold grandma's hand. It's not going to hurt her. Like, it's okay if you want to stay here, though, if you don't want to get closer. Like, really just helping people feel that whatever they're feeling is okay. Because some people may want to just leave the room, and that's all right too, but I want to be able to support everybody through the experience. and also encourage them that like it's not going to hurt somebody and they can
Mhm,
hear you. Like, let's talk to them, let's read to them. Like, and that's where too part of my plan that I create with them is like, well, do you want something in particular? Like maybe you had a certain book that you really loved. For some people that might be like a Bible or a religious text. Other people it might be like Alice in Wonderland because that was their favorite book when they were a child. Now that I know that, amazing. I'll make sure there's a copy and, we'll have people that you love read it to you so you could hear their voice. But it's really, again, it's not about me. I just try to be that person that kind of helps guide everybody, ideally without getting in the way, because it's not my death. It's not my loved one's death. I just want to encourage everybody to do what they need to do in that moment.
mhm, mhm. And I think, it as difficult as death may be is, it can also be this beautiful moment if you've got your family around you, the people that love you the most around you. And I was listening to a woman's story who is also a death doula, and similar to your story with her grandmother. And she said, at first she was frightened. Oh my goodness, my grandmother's dying. And then she talked about, but I got to do this with her, and I got to read to her, and I got to sing her songs with her. And I have all of those great memories that made it a beautiful moment. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that. Like, where's the beauty in this? Um, but I want to believe that it's there in order to take away like that scary factor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there
Mm,
is a lot of beauty that is there if we can be prepared for the
Mm,
realities so that we're not so afraid. And I have heard stories, I have not seen them in person yet, of people really coming together and bringing guitars or like whatever, and like almost like having a little party, like singing and just celebrating the person's life as they're actually dying.
right.
And
mm-hmm,
like to me, that's the way I want to die. I
Yeah.
don't want my family there upset and stressed out and like trying to answer questions to
Right.
doctors that they don't understand. And like, I want them to be there with me, fully present, experiencing this moment. Again,
mm-hmm,
even though it'll still be sad, experiencing the moment and making it so that in their mind, the end of my life is not this painful, traumatic memory. It could be like, well, no, but we were there with mom and we were, reading to her and we were there with her. And it was beautiful. That's what I want
mm-hmm,
them to be left
mm-hmm.
with.
Right. And you've just described my death plan. Because, sadly we've had to deal with death recently. And I was telling Judy last week, I want people cooking, I want laughter, I want music, and just a joyous coming together of all the people who I love. Um, yeah, Judy, what about your death plan? Are you going to copy off of me again?
Really, Candy? Um, you know what? I have not given it a whole lot
Uh-huh.
of thought. Um, it's funny because I think more about my service than I do about my passing. I
Mhm.
think more about um, the tone of it. And I just see the pictures that I want shared of my life with my children, with my husband, so on and so forth. So that's where my mind goes. And I think I go there, Candy, because that's what Mummy has always done.
Yeah,
At
yeah, we
my
know about my
funeral,
mother's service. Yeah, yeah, it's true.
yes, yes. So I haven't thought about the actual event. I just think about afterwards.
Mhm. Jill, have you had any revelations, doing this work? Like, I never thought of this, or like, have you changed the way you live because of how you've dealt with death?
100%. I have changed the way that I live my life since
Mm,
becoming a death doula.
mm,
And it's I was never afraid of death. I was never
Mhm.
afraid of dying. Even when I was a child, I was always kind of fascinated by it, and So I didn't necessarily have fears about death and dying, but I still didn't think about it that much. Potentially that my husband might die before me. God forbid one of my children might die before me. It still
Yeah.
happens to people all the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm,
People's children
Yeah.
mhm,
die, right? That's a
mhm,
reality. And so the more that I really thought about the fact that my life is short, no matter what, right? It is going to end at some point. That I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know when my husband's life is going to end. I don't know when my children's life is going to end. What's going to be really important to me, though, when I am dying? Because the more that I talk to people that are dying, the more that I read about people who, were dying, the things that they talked about at the end of life, things that were important to them were not the things that I was necessarily focused on. I was very focused on work even before I became a death doula, but I was very focused on work, and I volunteer a lot, and I'm out in my community, and I'm like doing all these things. And even online, like how much time I was spending online having conversations with people, like my time was just very not where I really want it to be. Once I got clear on the fact that when I'm dying, am I going to think about that person that I had a conversation with on Facebook that I was trying to convince them that they should change their mind about something?
Right.
Am I going to be worried about those emails that I maybe didn't answer immediately? Or am I going to be thinking about the softball games that I used to go to with my daughter, or the nights that we would play games together as a family? It really just helped me prioritize what's important. And I'm so much more present now with my family. I'm more patient with them. And that is partially that sometimes, having daughters, sometimes moms and daughters, we like, or like oil and
mhm,
water, and that's okay. Um, but there's times when in the past I would feel frustrated and I would feel annoyed. And now there's like this little voice in my head that's like, but there's a mom out there that would give anything to have their daughter yelling at them because they don't have their daughter.
mhm,
Yeah.
And
mhm,
that really changed the way that I now respond to her, because now I respond with the love and the appreciation and the gratitude that I have her in my life and that she's healthy and that we're together. And I don't know how long that's going to last. And
mhm.
so I just show up in a way where I'm so much more present with everything around me, the good and the bad,
Right.
like it's interesting because a couple of weeks ago I had a drunk driver total my minivan. I wasn't even in
Mm,
it, thank God, right? I was in my house, it was parked out in
Worked
front,
on the street.
it was parked on the street. But either way, it was my minivan, it was paid off. I was finally at a point where I was like, I don't have my car payment, this thing's paid off, it's going to last me forever until it's too old and it just runs out and it dies. And there was nothing I could have done to prevent it. Again, I wasn't even in it. It's not like I could have
mhm,
swerved out of the guy's way. And I was so concerned with, first off, was he okay? Was there anybody else in the car? He was visibly very upset. So I gave him a hug because he looked like he needed a hug. And my neighbors are all like, what the hell is wrong with her? And
Hmm.
even the cop was like, are you sure you're okay? Because, like,
Yeah.
you're not mad, you're not yelling, like, you're not. And I was like, it's just a vehicle. It's just a
Right.
mhm,
vehicle. And I wasn't faking it. I wasn't forcing myself to be calm. I was just calm about the situation because now I just live my life in a way where I'm like, it's not important. It's just, and yes, it's an inconvenience. Now I have a car payment again. That's an
Right.
inconvenience. But you know what? Nobody died. Nobody was
right,
hurt. He could
right.
have pulled out onto the road and killed somebody's kid
Mhm,
because if he was going to hit something, I'm glad it
mhm,
was my van.
mhm,
And it changed me so much. And I want people to really, that's part of why I want people to start doing this work earlier than later, because it will change the way that you live your life. It will. And I believe that so many of us, if we could get okay with the fact that we're going to die, we will live life better and we will be kinder to people. To me, like the root of so many fears, if you really think about it, the fear of others that aren't like us,
Right.
fear of anything, right? Heights, airplanes, spiders, snakes, whatever it is. What's the main fear? It's that we're going to die. The other is going to kill us, that thing is going to kill us. If we could be okay with the fact that we're going to die, then a lot of
Mhm.
those other fears will just kind of naturally work themselves out. And we would just live life better and we would interact with the other humans and the world around us a little bit better. So that's like my soapbox, honestly, is like the one thing that I really want people to get clear on is that
Mhm.
being okay with your death will change how you live your life.
That's such a good message and such a great place to end.
Yeah,
Judy, what
that
do
was
you think?
no, I have nothing else. That was
Yeah, that really
um
was.
yeah, the way you sum it up, and I think you're helping me to make sense of things in my life just in this conversation. So, thank you for that different perspective.
Mhm.
Um prior creating the priorities that we have for ourselves in our lives. No, was thank you.
You're
So,
very
Jill,
welcome.
where can people find you? You have your podcast, Seeing Death Clearly. Are you available on any other platforms?
Yeah, my business name is End of Life Clarity. That's where I kind of did the little spin for seeing
Mhm.
death clearly for the podcast.
Okay, okay,
Um, but I have a website. I am on all the social medias as seeing or as End of Life Clarity. So
okay.
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those things. But people are always welcome to reach out to me through email. I also have a really great Facebook group that I created where I'm not in there selling my, services. It
Uh-huh.
really is a Facebook
Support.
group. Yeah, where it's actually more that every day I post a different question. It might have to do with death, it might have to do with grief, it might have to do with life. But it's just to help people start having these conversations
Mm.
in their own life. And I've had people message me or people that I've ran into in real life that have said, the questions that you post in your Facebook group have started conversations between me and my spouse and my parents and my kids about these things because I had never thought about it. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's what I want to do is just have people start these conversations. And so by posting these questions, it just gets them thinking. And then it's a good
Right.
way to say to somebody, hey, like, have you thought about what you would want at the end of your life? Or have you thought about these different things? It's a great space for people. So, people can reach out to me on Facebook. I'd be happy to send them the link to the group. But really,
Mhm.
just find me, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to everybody and anybody about these things.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much.
Yeah.
Um, as a physician, I just want to say also that there is a specialty in medicine called palliative care. And those are physicians who um, are taking care of patients who have received a terminal diagnosis, not actually actively dying, but maybe you get a diagnosis and you may die 5 years from now, but they talk about what you want to do, and it's really comprehensive. And
Mhm.
there's that for pediatrics and adults.
Mhm.
So if you have a diagnosis that is deemed terminal, it's very important that you connect with a palliative care team.
I agree completely. I work
Yes,
very closely with a palliative care team at a local hospital. The doctors, the social workers, they are amazing. And not all of your like oncologist will say, hey, reach out to a palliative care doctor.
right,
So definitely,
Right.
if you do get a diagnosis, ask about seeing a palliative care doctor or social worker to start that process yourself. You have to kind of advocate for yourself in that case.
exactly, exactly. Well,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
Thank
much.
much.
you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Jill. It's been a pleasure to chat with you and to learn about, what brought you here and how it is you are helping others. It's important work. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tusoka. Please remember to like, follow, and share. We are on YouTube, the number 2, and then SOCA, Instagram, 2 Sisters of a Certain Age, and reach out to us on our email, tusokapodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so very much.
No Longer Network.